My parents refused to give me a single dollar for college, but somehow they handed my sister $115,000 like she was royalty, and I was the family disappointment. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lynn Carver, and I grew up in a small town where I always felt like the extra child in the house. I wasn't treated badly, but I was treated like I didn't matter as much. My younger sister, Kara, was always the center of everything. If she wanted something, she got it. If I needed something, I was told to be responsible. When it was time for college, I worked hard, applied early, and even earned partial scholarships. But I still needed help to cover the rest. When I asked my parents, they shut me down immediately. They didn't even think about it. They just told me they weren't a bank and that I should learn how to handle life on my own. I accepted it. I took extra shifts, saved every dollar I could, and pushed myself forward. I thought maybe they were just struggling with money and couldn't help me. But years later, I learned the truth at a Thanksgiving dinner. My parents proudly told relatives that they had given Kara $115,000 to help her start her life the right way. I sat there frozen. That was the money they claimed they didn't have. That was the support I begged for. They helped my sister because they saw her as the winner. And they left me to carry my dreams by myself. That night changed everything. It was the moment I realized I was never the daughter they planned to invest in, and I would have to build my future without them. Growing up in our quiet Michigan town, I noticed early that my family didn't treat me and my sister the same way. My sister, Kara, was the bright light in every room, at least in my parents' eyes. They watched her with pride, talked about her future as if it was guaranteed, and celebrated even the smallest things she did. If she wanted lessons, clubs, or new hobbies, they found a way to make it happen. They said she had potential, like she carried something special that needed constant care. I stood on the sidelines most of the time. I wasn't ignored, but I wasn't lifted up either. Whenever I asked for something, even small things, the answer always came with a reminder: be responsible, don't rely on others, figure things out yourself. It became the rule of my life long before I understood how different our paths were. I remember days when Kara got everything ready for her, while I worked harder just to keep up. She would be praised for trying, and I would be told not to expect anything. If I spoke about wanting more, I was met with looks that said I was asking for too much. There were moments when I wondered if I had done something wrong, or if there was a reason they treated us this way. But I learned to keep my feelings to myself. I stayed quiet, watching the gap between us widen as we grew older. Kara continued receiving chances, support, and encouragement at every step. I learned to depend on myself, not because I wanted to, but because it was clear no one else was going to step in for me. Even as a child, I knew the difference between being loved and being lifted, and only one of us was lifted. When I reached the point where I had to choose my path after high school, I finally felt excited. I wanted to study engineering, something that had interested me for years. I researched programs, visited campuses, and planned out everything I needed. I was proud of myself for having a clear goal. When I brought it to my parents, hoping they might guide me or support me even a little, the answer hit harder than I expected. They didn't ask questions, didn't look at my plans, didn't even pretend to consider it. They simply said they weren't a bank. Their tone made it clear the conversation was already over. I stood there, trying not to show how deeply their words cut. So I found another way. I took a job at a hardware store during the day and cleaned offices at night. It was exhausting, but I told myself it would be worth it. Some nights I was too tired to drive home, so I slept in my car for a few hours before starting again. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for anything. I just kept going. At home, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Kara floated through school with little effort, and every tiny achievement she made was treated like a major event. If she turned in a project, she was showered with compliments. If she made a simple choice, it was praised as maturity. She received encouragement at every turn, even though she wasn't working half as hard as I was. I tried to stay focused, reminding myself that this was my dream and no one else had to believe in it but me. Still, it was painful to watch my effort go unseen while her smallest actions were treated like accomplishments. It was the first time I understood how alone I truly was in building my future. Thanksgiving at my parents' house usually felt predictable: same dishes, same conversations, same routine. I went mostly out of habit, keeping my expectations low. That evening, I was helping set out dishes when I stepped into the hallway to grab extra napkins from the storage cabinet. As I walked back toward the dining room, I heard my mother's voice carry through the doorway. She sounded proud, almost glowing. I paused without meaning to, hearing my name mixed into the conversation. My uncle asked how Kara was preparing for her next steps. My mother responded so loudly and happily that it stopped me where I stood. She said they had provided Kara with $115,000 to give her a proper start. My father chimed in, saying they wanted her to begin adult life with confidence and stability. They spoke about it like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt the blood drain from my face. That amount wasn't just help, it was life-changing. I stayed hidden behind the doorway, listening as they explained how proud they were to invest in her future. Then my aunt asked about me. My mother laughed lightly and said I'd managed on my own just fine, as if I'd never asked for anything, as if the nights I struggled didn't exist. She didn't mention the time they told me they couldn't offer a single dollar. She didn't mention the excuses, the dismissive answers, or the way they ended the conversation before it began. Hearing them talk so casually about funds they claimed they never had felt like a punch to the chest. I returned to the kitchen quietly, hands shaking, trying to act normal as guests chatted in the next room. That night, something inside me changed. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was the clear understanding that they had chosen who mattered most, and it wasn't me. I couldn't keep what I heard to myself. The next afternoon, when most of the guests had already left, I asked my parents if we could talk. We sat in the living room, the air heavy and still. My voice trembled, but I spoke clearly. I told them I had heard about the money they gave Kara. I asked why they never offered even a small portion of that to me when I was trying to move forward. Their reactions were nothing like what I expected. There was no surprise, no guilt, no hesitation. My father leaned back and looked at me as if I was bringing up something trivial. He said Kara earned their support because she was the real winner of the family. The words didn't sound harsh at first, but the meaning stung. My mother added that I was far too independent to need assistance, as if my hard work was proof I didn't deserve any. The way she said it felt like a dismissal, not admiration. It was clear they believed I should manage everything alone simply because I always had. I sat there, stunned, trying to process their reasoning. They weren't denying anything. They believed every word they said. In their eyes, my sister was the one worth investing in, and I was the one who could survive without support, whether I struggled or not. Their calm, confident tone hurt more than anger ever could. It felt like they were pulling away the last bit of pretend fairness I had held on to. I realized then that all the years of telling me to handle things myself weren't lessons, they were choices. Choices to prioritize her over me. A quiet fire started inside me in that moment. For the first time, I understood that if I wanted a different life, I would have to build it with no expectations from them at all. After that conversation, I felt something inside me settle. Not in a comforting way, but in a clear, steady way. I knew I couldn't keep living under the same roof, pretending everything was fine. Within a week, I packed my things and found a small place to rent. It wasn't much, thin walls, old carpet, noisy pipes, but it was mine, and it was far from the weight I had grown up carrying. I searched for opportunities that didn't require approval from anyone else. That's how I found a technical apprenticeship at a local workshop. It paid little at first, but it offered real skills and real direction. I showed up early, stayed late, and tried to learn something new every day. The work was demanding, but it gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt before. My lifestyle shifted completely. I cut out anything that wasn't essential. I cooked simple meals, avoided spending on things I didn't need, and kept a strict budget. I didn't mind living quietly. There was a calmness in knowing every step I took came from my own effort. Little by little, the routine became steady. I gained confidence in tasks that once felt impossible. I earned trust from my mentors, who appreciated my consistency and willingness to take on difficult assignments. For the first time, I felt the ground under my feet was solid. I didn't call home, and they didn't reach out either. That silence told me everything. I understood that I wasn't walking away from a support system, I was stepping out of something that had never been won. Every small victory, every new skill, every bill paid on time reminded me that I was shaping a future without depending on anyone who saw my strength as an excuse to offer nothing. Time moved forward, and the long hours I invested eventually opened doors I once only hoped for. After completing my apprenticeship, I had the chance to apply for a role at a large aerospace company known for its demanding standards. I didn't expect much, but I gave it everything I had during the tests and interviews. A few weeks later, I received an offer. That moment felt unreal, like the world had finally shifted in my favor. The new position came with steady income, real benefits, and room to grow. I treated every task, big or small, with the same dedication that kept me going in the early years. Before long, my coworkers trusted me with more complex systems, and supervisors started noticing the reliability I brought to each project. The recognition wasn't loud, but it was honest, and that meant more to me than any praise I'd heard as a teenager. By the time I turned 27, I had saved enough to purchase a modest house on the edge of town. Signing the papers felt like placing a stone in the foundation of my own life, one built without borrowed money or unmatched expectations. The place wasn't luxurious, but it represented stability, something I had earned inch by inch. Meanwhile, news about Kara drifted to me through distant relatives. The large sum she received had vanished quicker than anyone expected. She had tried launching different ventures, each one sounding bold at the start, but none survived long. Each attempt left her with less than she began with, and the enthusiasm surrounding her future faded under the weight of poor decisions. I didn't feel triumphant hearing any of it. I simply understood, more clearly than ever, how differently our paths had unfolded, shaped not by luck, but by choices and effort neither of us could hide from anymore. I hadn't heard from my parents in a long time when my phone rang late one evening. Their number flashing across the screen felt strange, almost out of place. When I answered, both of them were speaking over each other, their voices tight and frantic. It took several moments before I could understand what they were trying to say. Kara's situation had taken a sharp turn. The bold ideas she had chased were gone, and so was the money. Every venture she attempted had collapsed, leaving her with nothing to fall back on. She had lost her job months earlier and hadn't found another one. On top of that, she had borrowed far more than anyone realized. Bills, penalties, and overdue notices were piling up faster than she could open them. My parents described it as if the world had suddenly attacked her, skipping over the choices that led her there. They sounded desperate, as though her struggles were a storm they never saw coming. Then the conversation shifted. Their tone changed, not softer, but expectant. They said it was time for me to step up as the responsible one. They claimed families should support each other and insisted that I contribute a large sum to help her regain stability. They spoke as if it was obvious, as if I should feel obligated because I had a steady life. They didn't ask, they assumed. Hearing them frame it as family duty made my stomach tighten. The same people who watched me struggle alone, who dismissed my needs without a second thought, now said I was the one who should rescue my sister. They talked about unity and loyalty, ignoring the years when those words never applied to me. I listened quietly, realizing they weren't reaching out because they cared about me. They were calling because they needed something, and I was their last option. They insisted we meet in person, saying it would be better to talk face to face. I agreed, mostly to understand the situation clearly. We sat around their dining table, the same place where so many unequal moments had happened, and the air felt thick with unease. Kara kept her eyes down, and my parents looked uncomfortable, as if they were carrying a secret they didn't want to say out loud. After several minutes of drifting explanations, I finally asked for the truth. My father avoided my gaze, and my mother twisted a napkin between her hands. Then, little by little, the real story came out. Kara hadn't only burned through what they gave her. She had taken out an additional private loan, one with steep interest, and used their names without permission. She had signed the documents herself, copying their handwriting to make it look official. The moment I heard the word forged, my chest tightened. It wasn't a simple mistake or bad luck. It was deliberate. The amount she owed was far beyond what I had imagined. The debt had grown with fees and penalties, turning into a number that made both of my parents fearful of what would happen next. They weren't just worried about the financial hit. They confessed they were terrified of people finding out. They said the situation would damage the family's reputation and bring judgment from relatives, neighbors, and anyone who might hear about it. That was why they wanted me involved. They believed that if I stepped in, everything could be handled quietly. Listening to them, I felt a wave of disbelief. They cared more about avoiding embarrassment than addressing what Kara had actually done. They looked at me as though I was responsible for smoothing out a disaster I had no part in creating. In that moment, their expectations became painfully clear. To them, my stability wasn't my achievement, it was their solution. After leaving that meeting, I sat in my apartment for hours, thinking carefully. Anger surged, but I refused to act out of impulse. I wanted to be deliberate, precise. I decided to collect everything I could: loan agreements, bank statements, receipts, anything that showed the truth. Every document became a piece of evidence, a way to understand exactly how deep the deception went. As I organized the papers, a pattern emerged. Kara and my parents had always assumed I would step in, quietly fixing problems while they avoided responsibility. They thought I would feel guilty, that I couldn't say no, that I would absorb the chaos because I was the dependable one. But I finally saw it clearly: their confidence in manipulating me had always been a weakness on their part. I mapped out the financial timeline, noting how money flowed from one account to another, and how their actions and omissions created opportunities for Kara to take advantage. I traced the loan forgeries, the unpaid debts, and the mismanaged funds. Every detail painted a picture of intentional neglect and recklessness on their part. Rather than let their assumptions dictate my next move, I decided to turn them into a plan. If they believed I could be coerced into bailing Kara out, I could use that expectation to my advantage. I didn't want revenge to be about humiliation or spite, it would be strategic. I would ensure the truth became undeniable, and the consequences would fall where they rightfully belonged. For the first time, I felt completely in control. The years of being underestimated, the silent struggle to survive on my own, and the constant favoritism had prepared me for this. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and nothing would stop me from reclaiming the power they had always tried to deny me. A week later, I agreed to meet them for dinner. I arrived early, carrying the stack of papers I had prepared. The table was set like every Sunday: polished silverware, neatly folded napkins, but tonight it felt different. I wasn't just sitting down to eat, I was sitting down to confront years of being overlooked and used. As the meal began, I spoke calmly, laying out the situation piece by piece. I explained how Kara had been favored in ways I could never understand, how my parents' constant praise for her had overshadowed my efforts, and how their choices had shaped my life without consideration for my struggles. I told them about the loan forgeries, the unpaid debts, and how I had discovered the true extent of Kara's recklessness. I emphasized that I would not be the one to rescue her. I would not be responsible for her mistakes, and I would not provide financial cover. I refused to sign any documents or make any payments on her behalf. I made it clear that their expectations of me were unfair and that I would not participate in their attempts to manage the situation quietly. At first, my parents were silent, stunned by the firmness in my voice. Then the anger erupted. My father slammed his hand on the table, shouting that I was being selfish and heartless. My mother's face turned red as she accused me of abandoning family values. They didn't try to understand, they attacked. In that moment, I realized how true it had always been: they had never respected me, only used me when convenient. Their accusations weren't new, they were proof of what I had sensed for years. I stayed composed, letting them vent while knowing that nothing they said could make me take responsibility for what wasn't mine. For the first time, I felt fully unshackled, standing firmly in the truth I had fought to uncover. Within a few months, the situation spiraled exactly as it should. Kara missed her loan payments, and the bank began sending notices that left no room for negotiation. The debt mounted quickly, accumulating penalties and fees that became impossible to ignore. My parents had co-signed without realizing the legal weight, and now they were forced to face the consequences of their choices. I watched from a distance as they struggled to contain the financial damage. Calls from creditors interrupted dinner, statements piled up on counters, and stress etched lines into their faces that had never been there before. Their attempts to solve the problem were frantic, disorganized, and ineffective. They had always believed money could fix everything, but now reality showed them it could not. Then came the call I had expected, though I braced myself for it. My mother's voice trembled, thick with tears. She blamed me, accusing me of ruining the family, of tearing apart the bonds that had supposedly held us together. Her words were laced with desperation, but they rang hollow against everything I had endured. I took a deep breath and spoke clearly, without anger, without hesitation. "You ruined it when you chose a favorite child," I said. The line went quiet for a long moment. She had no argument to offer. Every attempt to shift blame collapsed under the weight of truth. For the first time, I could witness the result of their actions without feeling guilt or fear. They were responsible for the mess, for the decisions that favored one child and ignored another. I had not interfered, and yet justice, in its own quiet way, had found its course. I felt an unusual calm, knowing that the imbalance they had created was finally exposed and undeniable. After the chaos settled, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was carrying. For the first time, I could focus on myself without distraction, without guilt. I began attending therapy, unpacking years of frustration, neglect, and silent endurance. Each session helped me understand how to set boundaries and value my own efforts. Slowly, I built a circle of friends who respected me, encouraged me, and celebrated my achievements. They became the family I chose, loyal, honest, and present. I also focused on my career, pushing forward without looking back. Each project I completed, each challenge I overcame, reinforced that my success was the result of my own persistence, not borrowed advantage. I furnished my home, invested in my skills, and created a life built entirely on effort, choice, and integrity. Months later, my parents reached out. Their voice was tentative, apologetic, but their words were hollow. It wasn't love behind their attempts to reconnect, it was convenience. They wanted the appearance of reconciliation, perhaps a sense that they had been forgiven, without acknowledging the real harm they had caused. I listened, then politely declined. I realized I didn't need their approval, their money, or their validation. All I had ever wanted was fairness, the chance to be treated equally. I finally understood that the only opinion that mattered was my own. Standing in my living room one quiet evening, I felt a sense of victory that cost nothing but patience and resolve. I wasn't the loser they had branded me. I was the one who built a life without shortcuts, without manipulation, and without compromise. For the first time, I was entirely free, and entirely myself.